The story of Isaac Newton begins not with grandeur or applause, but with silence. A winter night in the small Lincolnshire village of Woolsthorpe, England, where a frail infant was born too small, too weak, and too early to survive. It was Christmas Day 1642, a time when the world was in turmoil and England itself was torn apart by civil war. The baby's father, also named Isaac Newton, had died 3 months before his birth, leaving behind a widow and a legacy of absence. The child was not expected to live beyond the night. Yet, against all odds, the fragile newborn clung to life, breathing softly in the chill of a candlelit cottage, destined to become one of the greatest minds in human history. From his very first moments, Newton's life was defined by isolation. His mother, Hannah Askoff Newton, remarried when Isaac was barely 3 years old, leaving him behind to be raised by his maternal grandmother. That separation carved a deep wound in his young heart, a sense of abandonment that would shadow him for years to come. The quiet of his childhood was filled with solitude, where the only company he had was his own imagination. Many who knew him later in life said that Newton's silence and his unshakable focus were born in those lonely years. As he watched the world from the corners of rooms and the edges of fields, he began to develop a habit that would define his genius, the habit of observing everything, questioning everything, and never accepting anything without proof. In the small fields and meadows of Woolsthorpe, young Isaac built tiny mechanical toys and windmills powered by the breeze. He carved miniature furniture, designed sundials, and experimented with the movement of light and shadows. While other children played, he watched the patterns of the clouds, the path of ants, and the rhythm of falling rain. Nature, to him, was not merely a backdrop to life, it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. His curiosity was unrelenting, a quiet force pushing him to explore the world with questions too big for his time. Every motion, every sound, every flicker of light was an invitation to think deeper. When Isaac turned 12, he was sent to the King's School in Grantham, a small market town about 8 miles from Woolsthorpe. There, he lived in the attic of an apothecary named William Clark, whose home doubled as a shop filled with strange powders, glass bottles, and the smells of chemicals and herbs. It was in this house that Newton's fascination with science began to take shape. The apothecary's tools and mixtures captivated him. The idea that substances could transform and react became the seed of his lifelong curiosity about nature's hidden mechanisms. In that same attic room, he began to fill notebooks with sketches and notes, experimenting with ideas of motion, light, and mathematics. But life was not gentle with Newton. His mother, widowed again after her second husband's death, wanted Isaac to return home and manage the family farm. To her, farming was a respectable and practical life. To Isaac, it was imprisonment. The fields, though wide and green, felt like walls around his imagination. He had no love for the plow or the harvest. His thoughts were not on crops but on stars, on patterns, on invisible forces that governed both the heavens and the earth. He would often abandon his farm duties to sit under a tree or at the edge of a stream, lost in thought, sketching in the dirt or measuring shadows with a stick. His mind was not built for the soil, it was reaching for the cosmos. When the headmaster of the King's School saw Newton's brilliance, he intervened. Understanding that this boy possessed a mind too extraordinary to be wasted, he persuaded Newton's mother to let him return to his studies. Reluctantly, she agreed and Isaac resumed his education. This decision changed the course of history. Back at school, Newton's competitive spirit ignited. He was not content to simply learn, he wanted to excel, to dominate, to prove himself. It is said that one day, after being bullied by a stronger boy, Newton decided not to fight back with fists but with intellect. He studied relentlessly, surpassing the other boy in every subject until he became the top student. That moment revealed the essence of Newton's character. His mind was his weapon, and knowledge was his victory. In 1661, at the age of 18, Isaac Newton entered Trinity College, Cambridge. The world he stepped into was still deeply rooted in the old philosophies of Aristotle. where people believed that all truth could be found in ancient books rather than in observation. But Newton saw the cracks in that belief. He was drawn instead to the works of thinkers like Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler, men who dared to question the heavens themselves. At Cambridge, Newton began his quiet rebellion against centuries of accepted wisdom. He filled his notebooks with experiments and observations that would later evolve into revolutionary theories. Yet even in this intellectual environment, Newton remained a loner. He was not a man of conversation or social ease. While others debated in groups or gathered in the dining halls, Newton would sit alone in his room, illuminated by the flicker of candlelight, surrounded by papers, prisms, and instruments of his own design. He rarely attended lectures, but studied the works of great minds in private, absorbing knowledge with a hunger that bordered on obsession. His mind was constantly at work, connecting ideas across mathematics, physics, and philosophy. He was driven by something deeper than ambition. It was an insatiable need to know why. Then came 1665, the year that would transform Newton's life forever. The Great Plague swept through England, claiming thousands of lives and forcing Cambridge University to close its doors. For many, this was a time of fear and despair. For Newton, it was a time of creation. He returned to his home in Woolsthorpe once again, isolated from the world. But this isolation was not loneliness, it was liberation. Free from teachers, lectures, and distractions, Newton's mind expanded into uncharted territories. It was here, in the quiet fields of his childhood, that the seeds of his greatest discoveries took root. The same solitude that had once pained him in childhood now became his greatest ally. He would spend long hours staring at the sky, watching the sun move across the horizon, studying the shape of shadows, or experimenting with prisms in the sunlight streaming through his window. He observed, calculated, and questioned. Every moment was a dialogue between his thoughts and the universe. He later referred to this period as his Year of Wonders, a time when he laid the foundations for his theories on calculus, optics, and gravitation. But beneath the surface of these great discoveries was still the same boy who had once been left behind by his mother, who had once stared out across empty fields searching for meaning. The pain of abandonment and the hunger for understanding were now intertwined within him. His solitude had not broken him. It had forged him into a thinker unlike any other. He learned to find comfort in thought, to replace companionship with curiosity. He did not seek attention or fame, he sought truth, and truth, for Newton, was the ultimate form of belonging. Even at this early stage, one could sense that Newton's relationship with knowledge was not casual. It was spiritual. He believed that to understand nature was to glimpse the mind of God. Every equation, every experiment, every falling object was, to him, a clue in the divine puzzle of creation. He once wrote that he felt like a child playing on the seashore, finding a smoother pebble or prettier shell while the great ocean of truth lay undiscovered before me. This humility, born from his awareness of the infinite, defined his character as much as his genius. His struggles were not only emotional but physical. The harsh winters of Lincolnshire, the scarcity of resources, and the constant threat of disease were realities he endured quietly. Yet, no hardship could dull his mind. He learned resilience from necessity and patience from solitude. When others would have broken under loneliness, Newton turned it into fuel. When the world was chaotic and uncertain, he created order in his thoughts. Every difficulty in his early life became a stepping stone toward the clarity he would later bring to science. As Newton grew, so did his ambition to uncover the mechanisms of the universe. His early experiences taught him that truth could not be handed down, it had to be discovered. He had seen the limitations of authority, the impermanence of life, and the power of reason. These lessons made him fearless in his pursuit of knowledge. He questioned everything, even the very motion of the stars, daring to suggest that invisible forces, rather than divine hands, held them in place. In a sense, the story of Isaac Newton's early life is the story of transformation, how pain becomes purpose, how isolation becomes invention, and how curiosity becomes a bridge between man and the cosmos. His struggles were not distractions from greatness, they were the very crucible that forged it. The abandoned child of Woolsthorpe became the architect of universal law because he learned, from the beginning, to seek meaning where others saw emptiness. The fields where he once walked alone became the laboratory of his imagination. The stars he once gazed at with wonder became his equations. The solitude that once burdened him became the silence he needed to listen to the universe itself. Newton's early life is a testament to the power of perseverance and imagination. The story of a boy who turned loneliness into genius and transformed his pain into one of the most extraordinary minds the world has ever known. When we look back at that fragile child born under the winter sky, we see not just a man who discovered gravity, but a spirit molded by struggle, driven by wonder, and sustained by the sheer force of curiosity. His story reminds us that greatness often begins in obscurity, and that the most powerful discoveries are born not in comfort, but in solitude. Even centuries later, as we study his laws and theories, we can still feel the quiet intensity of that young boy in Woolsthorpe, staring into the night, searching for answers that would one day connect the earth to the stars. His journey from abandonment to brilliance stands as one of the most profound examples of how the human spirit can transcend hardship and turn silence into revelation. The young Isaac Newton, who returned to Cambridge after the plague, was no longer the same quiet student who had once hidden in the back of lectures. The solitude of Woolsthorpe had transformed him. Those months of silence and self-study had sharpened his mind into something rare, a mind that no longer relied on books alone, but trusted its own reasoning above all. The world had forced him into isolation, but from that isolation, he had learned something profound. True discovery is born in stillness. It was there, in the quiet spaces between thought and observation, that Newton began to hear the rhythm of the universe. His early struggles had not only built his resilience, they had made him self-reliant. Newton's loneliness had taught him how to learn without guidance, how to experiment without instruction, and how to find truth without confirmation. When he returned to Cambridge in 1667, his confidence was quiet but unshakable. His professors soon noticed that he thought differently from others. He did not merely read the theories of Descartes or Aristotle. He dissected them, challenged them, and reassembled them in his own mind. Every idea was tested, measured, and questioned. The boy who had once been left alone on a farm had become a man who no longer needed anyone's approval. The pain of his early abandonment had also left a lasting imprint on his personality. Newton distrusted authority and was fiercely protective of his ideas. Throughout his life, he would guard his discoveries with an almost obsessive secrecy, fearing ridicule or theft. Some historians believe that his guarded nature came from that deep emotional wound, an instinct to protect what was his, because he had once been left unprotected. His early hardships created a paradox within him, a man of extraordinary vision who preferred the shadows, a genius who changed the world yet avoided it. In the dimly lit rooms of Trinity College, Newton began to construct a new world of thought. He worked alone, his workspace filled with lenses, prisms, mirrors, and piles of mathematical notes. He had no laboratory assistant, no mentor guiding his experiments, just his mind and the universe as his teacher. Night after night, he recorded the behavior of light passing through glass, the movement of pendulums, the fall of objects, and the paths of celestial bodies. Every experiment was a conversation between him and nature. He was not merely observing phenomena, he was listening to the whispers of creation. The habits of solitude from his childhood had now become his greatest strength. Where others sought social validation, Newton sought understanding. He had learned long ago that knowledge was not a gift, it was a conquest. His notebooks from this period, filled with equations and sketches, show a mind that never rested. Every idea led to another, every answer opened to new questions. He was, as one of his contemporaries later described, a mind always at work, like a mill that never stands still. His curiosity, once born out of loneliness, had become his identity. The boy who built small windmills in Grantham was now constructing a mathematical universe governed by invisible forces. He began to apply his observations of everyday life to the cosmos itself. Why did apples fall downward? Why did the moon not fall to Earth? Why did the planets move in elliptical orbits rather than perfect circles? Each of these questions traced back to the same impulse that had followed him since childhood: the need to make sense of what others took for granted. Newton's early financial struggles also shaped his discipline. Money was scarce during his years at Cambridge, and he often lived with very little. He could not afford luxuries, so his pleasures became intellectual. He immersed himself in books, instruments, and solitary thought, not out of choice, but out of necessity. This austerity gave him a focus that few could match. While his peers spent their evenings in social gatherings or taverns, Newton spent his nights calculating, building, and dreaming. To him, the universe was not distant. It was present in every candle flame, every reflection, every whisper of wind outside his window. The foundation of Newton's brilliance lay not just in his intellect, but in his character, which had been shaped by struggle. He had endured loneliness, poverty, rejection, and self-doubt, yet he never allowed those obstacles to define him. Instead, he turned them into fuel. When others saw barriers, he saw challenges. When others accepted tradition, he saw opportunity. His childhood isolation had taught him that answers did not come from people, they came from persistence. As Newton's studies deepened, so did his sense of purpose. The early loss of his father and the absence of his mother had instilled in him a need for control over his world. In science, he found that control. The equations he wrote were not just mathematical. They were expressions of order in a life that had once felt chaotic. Every law he discovered was a step toward understanding a universe that had once seemed indifferent. For Newton, knowledge was a form of redemption, a way to impose harmony on the disorder of existence. This mindset led him to some of his earliest breakthroughs. In his 20s, he began exploring the behavior of light and color. Using prisms, he discovered that white light was not pure, but a combination of all colors in the spectrum. This finding shattered centuries of scientific belief. Yet, Newton's willingness to see beyond what others believed possible came from the same spirit that had guided him since childhood: the courage to question, to defy, and to seek his own answers. His struggles also made him deeply introspective. He kept detailed journals not only of his experiments but of his emotions, his moral reflections, and his spiritual beliefs. Newton's faith was as strong as his reason, and he believed that science was a language through which God revealed himself. His childhood loneliness, once a source of pain, had now evolved into a form of spiritual solitude, allowing him to feel connected to something far greater than himself. He saw divine order in every motion of the stars, every fall of a leaf, and every reflection of light. The child who had once searched for belonging had found it, not among people, but within the fabric of creation itself. The lessons of his early years continued to echo through his life. His need for self-reliance made him cautious in revealing his discoveries. He often waited years, even decades, before publishing his work. When he finally released Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, the Principia, in 1687, it was the culmination of decades of thought that had begun in those quiet years of isolation. The book revealed the laws of motion and universal gravitation, uniting the heavens and the earth under a single, elegant framework. Yet, behind those pages was the story of a boy who had learned, through hardship, that the answers to life's greatest mysteries are born in silence and perseverance. Even as fame found him, Newton remained the same inward, solitary thinker. He avoided personal relationships and rarely expressed emotion. His colleagues admired his intellect, but found him distant, almost unreachable. The walls he had built in childhood to protect himself from pain had become permanent parts of his identity. He had gained mastery over nature, but not over his own heart. The solitude that had once been his teacher now became his lifelong companion. Still, it was that same solitude that gave the world its greatest breakthroughs. Every equation Newton wrote, every theory he proposed, was infused with the memory of those early years. The nights spent alone under candlelight, the fields of Woolsthorpe where questions first took root, the silence that became his sanctuary. His genius was not separate from his suffering, it was born from it. His struggles had refined his mind into a lens so sharp that it could see order where others saw only chaos. The impact of those early hardships extended beyond his lifetime. Newton's way of thinking, rooted in observation, reasoning, and independence, became the foundation of modern science. He taught the world that truth is not inherited but discovered, that knowledge is not the privilege of the few, but the reward of the persistent. His life became a living proof that greatness can rise from obscurity, that the smallest child from the quietest village can change the course of civilization. In the grand narrative of human history, Newton's early life stands as a reminder that struggle and genius often share the same soil. His story is not one of privilege or ease, but of endurance and vision. Every obstacle he faced became part of the scaffolding upon which his intellect was built. Without the loneliness, there may have been no reflection. Without the pain, perhaps no persistence. Without the isolation, maybe no gravity. When one imagines Newton in his later years, sitting silently in his study, surrounded by books and instruments, one can almost hear the echoes of his past. The wind through the trees at Woolsthorpe, the ticking of his handmade clocks, the distant laughter of children he never joined. Those sounds never left him, they were woven into the rhythm of his thoughts. His discoveries were not merely intellectual triumphs, they were personal reconciliations, a lifelong conversation with the universe that began in the quiet corners of his childhood. In the end, the story of Isaac Newton's early life is not just a prelude to scientific greatness, it is the very foundation of it. Every moment of pain, every night of solitude, every unanswered question shaped the man who would define the laws of nature. His journey from a lonely child to the architect of gravity's mystery reveals the truth about genius. It is not born from comfort, but from curiosity, not from guidance, but from struggle. Isaac Newton's early years were a crucible, and out of that crucible emerged a mind so powerful that it could hold the universe in its grasp. The same boy who once stared out the window longing for his mother's return would one day look out into the heavens and find the invisible hand that holds the stars. His life reminds us that every unanswered question, every quiet struggle, and every moment of isolation can be the spark of discovery, that from the smallest, most fragile beginnings can rise the greatest of minds. The year was 1666. England lay quiet under the shadow of plague and fear. Villages were abandoned, the streets of London lay eerily still, and the air carried the scent of decay and smoke. The Great Plague had emptied universities, shut down marketplaces, and driven countless souls into the countryside seeking safety. Among those who fled was a young scholar named Isaac Newton, 23 years old, solitary and restless, returning to his childhood home in Woolsthorpe. He did not know it then, but the world was about to change forever, not through war or kings or conquest, but through a single thought that would arise from stillness, from silence, and from the fall of an apple. Woolsthorpe Manor stood surrounded by fields and orchards, a small and humble home that had once been Newton's prison as a child, but now became his laboratory. The isolation of the plague had cut him off from Cambridge, from teachers, from society, yet it had freed him from distraction. The world outside was suffering, but Newton's world was awakening. The young man who once built toys and sundials now turned his mind toward the greatest puzzle of all, the invisible force that bound all things together. On one ordinary afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the leaves of an apple tree, Newton sat in contemplation. The orchard was quiet, the air calm, the earth rich with the scent of summer. And then it happened. A small apple, ripe and round, loosened from its branch and fell to the ground before him. It was a simple event, a fruit falling, as it had done for countless generations. But for Newton, that moment became a revelation. He watched it fall and asked a question that no one before him had asked so deeply. Why does the apple fall straight downward, and not sideways or upward? What unseen power pulls it toward the Earth's center? That single question, born from an everyday moment, would become the cornerstone of modern science. The image of the falling apple has become legendary, repeated in classrooms, paintings, and stories across centuries. Yet few truly understand what it meant. It was not the apple itself that mattered, but the question it awakened. Newton did not merely see an object fall, he saw the universe move. He realized that the force drawing the apple downward was the same force keeping the moon in its orbit around Earth, and the planets in their paths around the sun. It was an invisible thread connecting heaven and earth, a universal law binding all matter through a single, elegant principle. But Newton's discovery did not emerge in an instant of inspiration alone. It was the result of years of quiet observation, mathematical genius, and relentless curiosity. The apple story, though romanticized through time, represents not one moment, but an entire period of awakening that historians now call Newton's annus mirabilis, his year of wonders. During these 2 years of plague isolation, from 1665 to 1667, Newton laid the foundations for calculus, optics, and the theory of gravitation, 3 pillars upon which modern science still stands. In those lonely months, Newton spent hours by the window of Woolsthorpe Manor, watching the heavens move. He charted the moon's orbit, measured the shadows of the sun, and imagined the pull of Earth upon distant bodies. He had read the works of Kepler and Galileo, who had each touched the edges of truth, but never crossed into its full understanding. Kepler had described the laws of planetary motion, and Galileo had studied falling bodies and inertia, but neither could explain why the planets moved as they did. The universe still lacked a cause, a reason. Newton set out to find it. He began with the Earth itself. If a force could pull an apple toward the ground, that same force must extend beyond the atmosphere. And if it could reach the moon, it might be the very force that keeps the moon from drifting away into space. But how could this be measured? Newton turned to mathematics. He began calculating whether the pull of Earth's gravity, decreasing with distance, could explain the moon's orbit. He used geometry, motion, and the concept of acceleration to test his hypothesis. Yet his first attempts failed. His estimates were rough, his measurements of the Earth's radius imprecise, and so his early numbers did not match observation. Frustrated, he set the problem aside, but not for long. Over the next 2 decades, Newton's idea matured quietly in his mind like an apple ripening on a branch. He would later say that he did not discover gravity, but rather discovered the laws by which it operates. This distinction is important, for the concept of falling had been known since ancient times. What Newton revealed was that the same force acting on a falling apple also governs the motion of planets and stars. It was a unifying principle, the first great law to show that the universe obeys the same rules everywhere. The historical context of this revelation is just as extraordinary as the discovery itself. The 17th century was an age of transition. Europe was emerging from the shadow of superstition and into the dawn of reason. Galileo had been condemned by the Church for saying that Earth moved around the sun. Kepler had uncovered the laws of planetary orbits, but could not explain their cause. Descartes had tried to describe motion through invisible vortices of ether, but his theories lacked proof. Science was still fragmented, bold ideas scattered like stars without a constellation to connect them. Newton became the astronomer who connected the stars. By the time Newton published his philosophy Naturalis Principia Mathematica in 1687, his vision had expanded far beyond the apple tree. The Principia revealed a cosmos governed not by divine intervention but by natural law, a clockwork universe operating with perfect precision under the guidance of gravity and motion. The idea was revolutionary. For the first time, humanity understood that the same invisible force that makes an apple fall could reach across the vastness of space, shaping galaxies and guiding the tides. Gravity was no longer a mystery of heaven, it was the language of nature itself. But the path from orchard to Principia was long and filled with struggle. Newton was not the first to notice gravity, but he was the first to describe it mathematically and universally. Before him, Galileo had studied acceleration, how objects fall faster the longer they fall, but he had not extended it to celestial bodies. Kepler had found that planets moved in ellipses, not circles, but did not know why. It was Newton who saw that the same equation could describe both the apple and the moon. His law of universal gravitation stated that every object in the universe attracts every other object with a force directly proportional to their masses and inversely proportional to the square of their distance. This simple statement became one of the most powerful truths in human history. Yet Newton never sought fame for this revelation. For years, he hesitated to publish his work. He was perfectionist to the core, haunted by the fear of criticism and misinterpretation. Only after encouragement from fellow scientist Edmund Halley, who would later lend his name to the famous comet, did Newton finally bring his theories to light. Halley's insistence, combined with his admiration for Newton's intellect, led to the birth of the Principia, a book that would forever alter the course of human understanding. The gravity Newton revealed was not only a physical force, it was a philosophical revolution. Before him, people believed that celestial bodies were moved by divine hands or mystical forces. After him, they understood that nature followed laws, precise, predictable, and universal. The heavens were no longer unreachable. They were governed by the same rules that shaped the earth. Humanity's place in the cosmos changed forever. And yet, in his quiet humility, Newton saw himself not as a conqueror of nature, but as its observer. In later years he wrote, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, finding a smoother pebble or prettier shell, while the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." Those words reflect the essence of the man beneath the legend. A mind that could grasp infinity, yet still marvel at its mystery. The story of the apple, simple though it may seem, encapsulates everything Newton stood for: curiosity, observation, patience, and wonder. It reminds us that the greatest revolutions in thought begin not with grand machines or royal decrees, but with the courage to ask a question no one else has asked. In Newton's world, even the fall of an apple became a message from the universe. As he gazed at the stars in the clear Lincolnshire night, Newton must have felt a sense of quiet awe, the realization that the same force holding him to the earth was the same force guiding the moon through the heavens. He had found a bridge between the human and the cosmic, between the apple and the infinite. That bridge was gravity, the invisible thread binding all things in existence. By the time he reached his 40s, Newton had transformed from a solitary scholar into the architect of modern physics. Yet he never forgot the orchard, the stillness, and that moment of falling fruit. To him, it symbolized the harmony of nature, how the smallest event on earth reflected the grand design of the universe. And in that harmony, Newton found the truth he had been searching for since childhood, that all motion, all matter, and all creation are united by one law. In the centuries that followed, his discovery would inspire generations of scientists, from Laplace and Maxwell to Einstein, each building upon the foundation he had laid beneath that apple tree. But none could erase the image of that young man in Woolsthorpe, sitting beneath the branches, watching an apple fall and glimpsing the secrets of eternity. The story of gravity is not just a story of science, it is a story of human curiosity, of how one mind in solitude dared to question the ordinary and found the extraordinary. The true power of Newton's discovery lies not only in the equations he wrote, but in the idea that the universe is understandable, that the stars above and the apples below obey the same laws. It is a truth so simple, yet so profound, that it changed how humanity sees itself forever. The story of gravity did not end with a falling apple, nor did it remain a mere symbol of curiosity. It became the central theme of Isaac Newton's scientific revolution, a bridge between myth and mathematics, between the mysteries of heaven and the laws of earth. In the years following his quiet revelation at Woolsthorpe Manor, Newton's obsession with understanding how the universe works intensified into a lifelong pursuit of perfection. He did not rest after conceiving the idea of gravity. Instead, he spent decades refining it, proving it, and building an entire framework of science around it. The world saw him as a genius, but Newton saw himself as a humble interpreter of nature's grand design, piecing together the invisible threads that held the cosmos together. He began his formal exploration of gravitation after returning to Cambridge University in 1667, following the end of the Great Plague. He was still young, barely in his mid-20s, yet the seeds of his future masterwork had already taken root. At that time, the world's understanding of motion and the cosmos was still shaped by the works of ancient philosophers like Aristotle and by astronomers such as Ptolemy. These ideas had stood largely unchallenged for centuries, but a century earlier, Nicolaus Copernicus had dared to place the sun at the center of the universe, and Johannes Kepler had mathematically described how planets moved in elliptical orbits. Galileo Galilei had then confirmed, through observation and experiment, that motion on Earth followed precise laws. Yet none of these brilliant thinkers could explain why planets moved as they did, why they stayed in orbit rather than flying off into the darkness. This unanswered question became Newton's obsession. He sought the universal law that could connect the fall of an apple to the movement of Jupiter. He realized that if the same force pulling an apple to the ground also pulled the moon toward Earth, then the heavens and the earth must follow a single rule, a law of nature that governed all bodies, from the smallest pebble to the largest star. This was a revolutionary thought. Until Newton, people had believed that the heavens were governed by divine perfection, separate from the laws of the earthly realm. Newton erased that divide. He dared to say that the same physics that made an apple drop was at work in the majestic orbits of the planets. His journey to prove this idea was long, complex, and deeply personal. He built his theory not on guesswork, but through relentless calculation, using mathematics as his weapon. Day after day, night after night, he would isolate himself in his study, drawing diagrams, calculating angles, and measuring distances with unimaginable precision for his time. He developed new mathematical tools to express motion, tools that would later be known as calculus. Newton used these tools to describe how gravity works not as a mystical attraction, but as a measurable, predictable force. He began to see the entire universe as a vast mechanical system, a grand clockwork powered by laws so elegant that they reflected divine order itself. In his solitude, Newton calculated the force that kept the moon in its orbit. He compared the rate at which an apple falls toward the Earth to the rate at which the moon is pulled toward our planet. The numbers, he discovered, matched perfectly once he accounted for the distance. The farther away an object is, the weaker the gravitational pull. This realization stunned him. He had found the thread that connected all motion. Every object in the universe, he reasoned, attracts every other object with a force that depends on their masses and the distance between them. He called this the Universal Law of Gravitation. But Newton did not rush to publish his discovery. He feared criticism, conflict, and error. For more than 20 years, his groundbreaking idea remained locked in his mind and in his papers. During this time, he continued to refine his understanding, expanding it to include planetary motion, tides, and the shape of the Earth itself. He realized that Earth was not a perfect sphere, but slightly flattened at the poles, stretched by the centrifugal force caused by its rotation. He understood that gravity's reach was infinite, binding every part of creation together. For Newton, gravity was not merely a force, it was the invisible glue of the cosmos. The turning point came in the 1680s when astronomer Edmund Halley, known today for the comet that bears his name, visited Newton. Halley was intrigued by the paths of the planets and asked Newton what kind of curve a planet would follow if it were attracted to the sun by a force that varied with the inverse square of its distance. Without hesitation, Newton replied, "An ellipse." Halley was astonished. When he asked how Newton knew, Newton calmly said he had calculated it years ago. Halley urged him to publish his work, realizing that it could transform science forever. Encouraged by Halley's persistence and financial support, Newton finally began assembling his ideas into what would become one of the most influential books in human history, Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, commonly known as the Principia. It was published in 1687, and its impact was immediate and profound. Within its pages, Newton presented his three laws of motion and his law of universal gravitation, combining them to explain the behavior of every object in the universe. The Principia united the physics of the heavens and the physics of Earth in one coherent framework. For the first time, humanity had a mathematical blueprint of the cosmos. The publication of the Principia marked the beginning of the scientific revolution in its truest form. Newton had redefined humanity's place in the universe. His law of gravitation showed that the universe was not ruled by unpredictable forces or divine whims, but by precise, elegant, and measurable laws. Gravity, he explained, was a natural property of matter. Every particle in the universe exerts an attraction on every other particle. The strength of that attraction decreases as the distance increases, following the inverse square law. This simple equation explained everything from the fall of an apple to the orbits of planets and even the motion of comets. Yet, despite his success, Newton remained deeply humble about his achievement. He saw himself not as the creator of these laws, but as their discoverer. A man who had simply uncovered what had always been written into the fabric of nature. He once wrote, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself, I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." These words captured the essence of Newton's mind, endlessly curious, yet aware that even his monumental discoveries were only a glimpse of a larger mystery. Newton's law of gravitation soon became the foundation for countless advances in astronomy, physics, and engineering. With his equations, scientists could predict planetary motion with extraordinary precision. Sailors used Newtonian physics to navigate the seas, astronomers used it to discover new planets, and engineers used it to design machines that worked with mathematical accuracy. The age of reason and science had truly begun, and Newton stood at its center. Still, the man behind the science remained complex. He was meticulous, secretive, and often tormented by self-doubt. The perfection he demanded of his calculations mirrored the perfection he sought in his understanding of nature. His work on gravity was more than an intellectual pursuit, it was a spiritual one. He believed that uncovering the laws of motion was akin to uncovering the will of the Creator. To him, every equation was a revelation, every force a signature of divine design. As Newton's fame grew, so did his conflicts. Rivalries with other scientists, including Robert Hooke and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, tested his patience and pride. Yet even amid controversy, his law of gravitation remained unshaken. No experiment, no theory, no criticism could disprove its power or precision. It stood as the cornerstone of science for over 2 centuries, guiding generations of physicists until Albert Einstein expanded upon it with his theory of general relativity in the 20th century. But even Einstein, with all his brilliance, paid tribute to Newton's genius, acknowledging that his own work was built upon Newton's vision. The story of gravity is, therefore, not just the story of a falling apple. It is the story of the human mind reaching beyond its limits. It is the tale of how one man's question, "Why does an apple fall?" evolved into a universal truth that explained the architecture of the cosmos. Newton transformed a simple observation into a law that governs galaxies. He showed that the universe is bound together by invisible forces, precise and predictable, yet profoundly beautiful. In every sense, the law of gravity remains a symbol of human curiosity and the power of thought. It reminds us that great discoveries often begin in silence, not in grand laboratories or royal courts, but in moments of solitude, where imagination meets observation. Newton's journey from an apple tree to the Principia teaches us that the universe reveals its secrets only to those who dare to question what others take for granted. Isaac Newton's discovery of gravity was not a moment of luck or coincidence. It was the culmination of a lifetime of reflection, mathematics, and wonder. It united the world below with the heavens above and redefined the limits of human understanding. Even now, centuries later, as we explore the outer reaches of space, every orbit, every satellite, every spacecraft still follows the invisible path drawn by Newton's law. The man who once sat quietly under a tree continues to guide humanity's voyage through the stars. Isaac Newton's name is forever intertwined with the language of the universe, mathematics. It was through numbers, patterns, and logic that he sought to understand creation itself. To him, mathematics was not just a tool, it was the divine code written into the very structure of reality. The world, he believed, could be read like a book, each number a letter, each equation a sentence in the grand story of existence. Yet, behind this beautiful philosophy lay years of struggle, solitude, and relentless effort that gave birth to one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements: the invention of calculus. This was not simply a mathematical method, it was a revolution that changed how humankind could measure, predict, and understand motion, space, and time itself. In the mid-1660s, during the years when England was struck by the Great Plague, Newton retreated to his family home in Woolsthorpe. He was just in his early 20s, away from the scholarly halls of Cambridge, but surrounded by silence, nature, and thought. The world was paralyzed by disease and fear, yet Newton's mind was in constant motion. As he walked the fields and watched the skies, he became fascinated by the way objects moved. Not just how they fell or rolled, but how they changed their speed and direction over time. He realized that to truly understand motion, one needed a new kind of mathematics, something beyond the geometry and algebra of the ancients. The problem was profound. Nature rarely moves in straight lines or steady speeds. Planets curve in their orbits, apples accelerate as they fall, and light bends through glass. The mathematics of the time could describe fixed shapes and uniform motion, but could not capture change itself, the way things constantly vary. Newton recognized this gap and set out to fill it. He began to imagine motion not as a series of separate positions, but as a continuous flow. How fast something moves is not just distance over time, it is how that distance changes every instant. How something accelerates is not just speed, it is how that speed itself changes from moment to moment. These ideas, though common to us now, were revolutionary then. To describe these continuous changes, Newton developed a method he called the method of fluxions. In his private notes, he used the term fluxion to refer to a quantity that was changing or flowing. He imagined every moving thing as a quantity that increases or decreases over time, like a stream of numbers. If he could measure the rate of that change, he could measure motion itself. This insight gave rise to what we now call differential calculus, the study of how things change at every moment. Likewise, by reversing the process, by adding up an infinite series of tiny changes, he developed integral calculus, which allowed him to measure total quantities such as distance, area, or volume from these rates of change. It is difficult to overstate the brilliance of this leap. Before calculus, the natural world was fragmented and disconnected. After calculus, it became a single continuous system governed by elegant laws. Through this new language, Newton could express motion, growth, force, and even gravity in terms of precise mathematical relationships. It was as though he had built a bridge between the physical and the abstract, turning nature into something measurable and predictable. In the solitude of Woolsthorpe, Newton applied his calculus to problems that had baffled scientists for generations. He used it to derive the laws of planetary motion that Kepler had only described empirically. Kepler knew that planets moved in ellipses, but he did not know why. Newton used calculus to show that if a planet is pulled toward the Sun by a force that decreases with the square of the distance, it will move precisely as Kepler described. This was a stunning confirmation, not only of Kepler's work but of Newton's entire view of nature as a realm governed by mathematical harmony. Yet Newton was not ready to share this discovery. He feared controversy and felt that his ideas were not yet polished. He kept his methods secret, writing them down in notebooks that no one else saw. Years later, in 1671, he mentioned his method of fluxions to a few trusted colleagues, but it was not formally published. This secrecy would later spark one of the greatest intellectual disputes in history. Across Europe, a German philosopher and mathematician named Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz was developing a similar mathematical system. Working independently, he created his own version of calculus using a more elegant and symbolic notation, one that is still in use today. When Leibniz published his findings in 1684, Newton's followers claimed that he had stolen the idea from Newton's unpublished work. The controversy erupted into a fierce feud between the two camps, dividing the scientific community of Europe. For Newton, this was more than an academic argument. It was a wound to his pride. He believed that his invention had come first, and he guarded his intellectual reputation with ferocity. The Royal Society, of which he later became president, even published reports defending Newton and discrediting Leibniz, though modern historians now recognize that both men arrived at their discoveries independently. But behind the rivalry, something remarkable had occurred. Two of the greatest minds of the 17th century had reached the same truth, using different paths. This convergence itself testified to the power and inevitability of calculus. It was a discovery waiting to be found, a cornerstone of human understanding destined to emerge. While others fought over credit, Newton focused on the power of what calculus could do. Through it, he unified mathematics and physics in a single framework. He could describe the trajectory of a cannonball, the orbit of a planet, or the curve of a river with the same set of principles. The method of fluxions allowed him to transform the vague ideas of motion and force into precise mathematical formulas. These formulas became the foundation for his Principia Mathematica, the monumental work that explained the universe in mathematical terms. Every equation in that book, every proof of planetary motion, every law of motion depended on the invisible scaffolding of calculus. Newton's mathematical genius went beyond the invention of calculus. He made significant contributions to other areas as well. He expanded upon algebra and geometry, introducing new methods of solving equations and analyzing curves. He explored infinite series, developing tools to approximate complex functions with astonishing accuracy. His work in binomial expansions laid the groundwork for much of modern mathematical analysis. In each of these efforts, his aim was the same: to find harmony, order, and simplicity in the apparent chaos of the world. In private, Newton often described his mathematics as a form of worship. To him, the universe was a divine mechanism, and by decoding its laws, he was uncovering the language of God. Every equation, every discovery, was a glimpse into the mind of the Creator. This belief gave his work an intensity that bordered on spiritual devotion. He wrote that truth is the offspring of silence and meditation, a reflection of his solitary life and his conviction that great understanding comes from deep contemplation rather than public debate. As the years passed, calculus began to spread across Europe, influencing generations of mathematicians and scientists. It became the foundation for modern physics, engineering, and astronomy. The trajectories of rockets, the flow of electricity, the bending of light, all could be described through calculus. What began as Newton's quiet meditation in the countryside became the mathematical heartbeat of the modern world. The legacy of calculus is so vast that it is almost invisible, woven into every branch of science and technology. Yet at its heart lies a simple idea that change can be measured, that motion can be understood, that the infinite can be captured in numbers. Newton gave humanity a way to describe not just what is, but what becomes, to understand the flow of time and matter as a continuous, harmonious whole. It is a discovery that transcends its era, reaching into every future where thought and calculation meet. For Newton, the creation of calculus was both an act of intellect and faith, a step toward the divine symmetry of the cosmos. When he gazed at the stars, he saw not distant lights but points on a mathematical canvas, each moving according to eternal laws. He had taken the mysteries of the universe and expressed them in the language of logic. The invention of calculus was his bridge between heaven and earth, a key to unlocking the mechanics of existence. And in doing so, Newton transformed not only mathematics but the very way humanity perceives reality itself. As Isaac Newton grew older, the brilliance that had once been born in solitude became the guiding light of the scientific world. The mathematical language he had forged, the calculus of fluxions, spread quietly through his mind like fire through dry grass. It was no longer just a method of describing movement, it was a framework for perceiving reality itself. The very laws of the cosmos seemed to unfold naturally from it, as though Newton had not invented mathematics, but had uncovered the divine structure upon which all existence was built. For him, mathematics was not simply numbers or symbols. It was the breath of the universe, the bridge between human thought and the infinite order of creation. When Newton returned to Cambridge after his years of isolation during the plague, he began revising and perfecting his ideas. His notebooks from this period, filled with dense writing and hastily drawn diagrams, show a mind that never rested. Every margin was crowded with experiments, equations, and thoughts. He worked in silence, rarely speaking, his eyes fixed on his notes, as if he could see the fabric of the cosmos written within them. The fluxions he had invented now grew into a vast system of relationships that could explain not only simple motion, but complex changes in every branch of natural philosophy. He understood, perhaps better than anyone before him, that nature was not a sequence of separate events but a continuous process, an unbroken dance of cause and effect. At Cambridge, Newton's reputation began to rise, but he remained cautious. The world outside was full of debate, rivalry, and ambition. The great thinkers of Europe, Descartes, Huygens, Hooke, and Leibniz, were shaping a new age of reason, but Newton was different. He did not seek glory or recognition, he sought truth. He wrote as though the world did not yet exist, as if his audience were the cosmos itself. His letters reveal a man both humble and uncompromising, aware that his discoveries would one day change everything, yet unwilling to share them until they were perfect. In 1669, Isaac Barrow, his mentor at Cambridge, recognized the young mathematician's genius and resigned his professorship so that Newton could succeed him. It was a remarkable gesture, one great mind stepping aside for another. As Lucasian professor of mathematics, Newton gained not only a title but also a platform from which to shape the intellectual future of England. His lectures, however, were sparse and often incomprehensible to his students. He was not a teacher in the ordinary sense, he was a man speaking to eternity. His work was so advanced that few could follow it. But he did not mind. The important thing was that the truth was being written, preserved, and refined. Newton's exploration of calculus deepened when he began applying it to geometry and physics. He realized that many ancient mathematical problems could now be solved through his method of fluxions. Curves that had once defied description could be measured, slopes could be calculated at any point, and areas under curves could be determined with infinite precision. He demonstrated that the same principles governing motion also governed growth, decay, and oscillation. To Newton, the world became a vast set of interlocking functions, everything measurable, everything explainable. While Newton was silently perfecting his methods, across the English Channel, Leibniz was following his own path. Using a more symbolic and elegant notation, Leibniz's calculus appeared simpler and more accessible. His publication in 1684 immediately gained attention across Europe, while Newton's version remained buried in private manuscripts. By the time Newton's Principia appeared in 1687, the two systems were already on a collision course. It was inevitable that credit would become contested, and when it did, the scientific world was torn in two. The controversy over calculus was more than a quarrel of pride, it was a reflection of the fragile nature of genius. Newton felt that his life's work had been overshadowed, that someone had stolen not just his method, but his identity as the architect of modern mathematics. The accusations and letters that followed revealed the darker side of his nature. His temper, his need for control, and his refusal to forgive. He collected documents, correspondences, and drafts to prove his claim. He demanded loyalty from his peers, and when the Royal Society investigated the dispute, he quietly ensured that the final report would favor him. For Newton, truth and honor were inseparable, and he would not allow his creation to be questioned. But despite the bitterness of this conflict, the power of calculus could not be diminished. Both Newton and Leibniz had given humanity an extraordinary gift, and though their names became symbols of rivalry, their discoveries together forged the very foundation of modern science. The fluxions of Newton and the differentials of Leibniz were two expressions of the same truth, a truth so deep that even time could not erase it. As the years passed, Newton's calculus began to shape the way scientists approached the universe. Astronomers used it to refine Kepler's laws and calculate planetary orbits with new precision. Engineers began to use its equations to predict mechanical motion and design machines that worked according to predictable forces. In architecture, art, and even economics, the calculus of change became a universal language. It was as if Newton's private vision of harmony had escaped the solitude of his study and entered the bloodstream of civilization itself. The Principia Mathematica, Newton's greatest work, was a triumph of calculus in disguise. Though the book used geometric proofs rather than the symbolic calculus we know today, every law and equation within it was shaped by the logic of fluxions. The law of universal gravitation, the three laws of motion, and the explanation of planetary orbits all arose from the same mathematical insight that motion could be expressed as a continuous process. Without calculus, the Principia would not exist. It was through this unseen foundation that Newton built the mechanical universe, a perfect structure where every body, from the smallest grain of dust to the largest star, followed predictable paths through space and time. Newton's mathematical legacy continued to evolve even after his death. Over the centuries, his calculus became the foundation for analysis, physics, and all quantitative sciences. The discoveries that came after, electricity, thermodynamics, relativity, quantum mechanics, were all written in the language Newton had helped to invent. Every student of science who studies motion or change is, in a sense, walking the path he carved. Each derivative, each integral, is a whisper of his genius, a continuation of his quest to understand the infinite through the finite. In his later life, Newton became a national figure, a symbol of England's intellectual power. Yet even amid fame and recognition, he often withdrew into quiet reflection. The flame that had driven him in youth never faded, though it turned inward. He would spend hours rereading ancient texts, searching for the hidden meanings of Scripture, or revisiting his old notes as if trying to find one more secret he might have missed. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by papers that defined centuries of science, Newton remained what he had always been, a seeker. He once said that he felt like a child on the seashore, picking up smooth pebbles while the great ocean of truth lay undiscovered before him. These words were not humility for its own sake. They were an honest confession from a man who had glimpsed the enormity of knowledge and understood that human comprehension would always be small in comparison. His discovery of calculus, his exploration of gravity, his laws of motion, these were steps toward that ocean, reflections of his tireless effort to reach beyond the limits of human thought. In the centuries since his death, Newton's calculus has become the silent engine behind the world we live in. It guides the satellites that orbit our planet, the spacecraft that travel beyond our solar system, and the technology that defines modern life. From the curvature of a bridge to the flight of a rocket, from the path of a planet to the rhythm of sound, Newton's mathematics continues to describe reality. His fluxions, once scribbled in secret in a small English manor, now pulse through computers, telescopes, and equations that probe the farthest corners of the universe. Yet, beneath all the precision and abstraction, calculus remains what Newton intended it to be, a way to understand change, to capture the flow of nature in the stillness of numbers. It is the mathematics of life itself, of motion, of transformation. Newton's genius lay not just in his ability to calculate, but in his ability to see, to perceive the hidden order behind everything that moves. He turned observation into language, motion into logic, and mystery into understanding. In the end, Newton's invention of calculus was not just a triumph of intellect, but a triumph of imagination. He taught humanity to think in infinitesimals, to see the universe not as a static creation, but as an ever-changing, dynamic continuum. Every heartbeat, every orbit, every wave is a testament to this vision. Through calculus, Newton gave the world a tool to explore infinity, to measure what cannot be seen, and to predict what has not yet happened. Even now, centuries later, the spirit of that discovery endures. It lives in every scientist who dares to ask why, in every student who finds beauty in an equation, in every thinker who sees the world not as it is, but as it becomes. Isaac Newton, the quiet man from Woolsthorpe, did not just invent a branch of mathematics, he unlocked a way of seeing the universe itself. His calculus was not merely a method, it was a vision that continues to illuminate the path of knowledge, guiding humanity ever closer to the infinite truth he so passionately sought. In the quiet solitude of his study, Isaac Newton's curiosity about light became a gateway to yet another dimension of discovery. As sunlight streamed through his window, he noticed how it changed when it passed through glass. This simple observation became the seed of an idea that would one day reveal the hidden colors within light itself. Newton believed that light was not a simple or pure substance as most scholars of his time thought. To him, it was a complex entity, waiting to be understood. He began to experiment with prisms, using beams of sunlight that he allowed to pass through the glass to observe what would emerge on the wall behind it. What he saw astonished him, a beautiful band of colors spreading out in perfect order: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. The revelation was profound. The world had long believed that the colors came from the glass or from impurities in light itself, but Newton realized the truth. White light was not a single thing, but a mixture of all colors combined. Every hue that painted the world existed within that beam of sunlight. Through his meticulous experiments, Newton proved that when light was passed through a prism, it separated into its constituent colors, and when those colors were passed through another prism, they could recombine to form white light again. This discovery was revolutionary. It shattered the ancient belief that light was modified by the medium it passed through. Newton had shown that light contained the colors inherently, and that the prism merely revealed what was already hidden inside. But Newton's fascination with light didn't stop there. He wanted to know how light behaved when it encountered mirrors and lenses. He realized that the refracting telescopes of his time, which used glass lenses, were limited. They created unwanted fringes of color, known as chromatic aberrations, because lenses bent each color of light differently. Most astronomers had accepted this as an unavoidable flaw, but Newton refused to settle. Instead, he decided to invent something entirely new, a telescope that would use mirrors instead of lenses to gather and focus light. In 1668, Newton built the world's first reflecting telescope. It was small, elegant, and remarkably powerful for its size. The mirror inside it focused all colors of light together without distortion, producing clear, sharp images of the heavens. This invention not only revolutionized astronomy, but also marked a milestone in optical technology. Newton's discoveries in optics opened a new era in the understanding of vision and light. He studied how the human eye perceives color, theorizing that the retina is stimulated differently by each wavelength of light. He began to see light not just as a physical phenomenon, but as the bridge between the external universe and human perception. Through light we see, we measure, and we understand. His ideas formed the foundation of modern optics, influencing everything from camera lenses to fiber optics centuries later. What made Newton's study of light so extraordinary was not just his technical genius, but his philosophy behind it. He sought order in everything, the belief that nature was written in a language of laws and patterns. To him, light was a metaphor for knowledge itself, an illumination of truth hidden within the darkness of ignorance. His experiments were not only scientific inquiries, but a reflection of his spiritual curiosity. Newton believed that understanding light was akin to uncovering the divine principles of creation. Just as gravity governed the motion of planets, light governed the visibility of existence. It was the thread that connected the human soul to the universe. In his later years, Newton compiled his findings into his book Optics, published in 1704. It detailed every experiment, every prism test, and every reflection that had occupied his mind for decades. But more than a scientific text, Optics was a philosophical exploration of how humans perceive reality. It influenced generations of scientists, artists, and thinkers who began to see light not only as a physical force, but as a symbol of discovery and enlightenment. From the moment sunlight passed through his prism to the day his telescope revealed distant stars, Newton had reshaped how humanity understood the world. He turned light from a mystery into a measurable, predictable phenomenon. His work laid the foundation for everything from modern physics to the technology of vision that defines our modern age. Isaac Newton, through his relentless curiosity and brilliant mind, showed that the universe was not chaos but harmony, and that within a single ray of light, the entire spectrum of truth was waiting to be found. In the age before Newton, the movements of the heavens and the behavior of earthly objects seemed like two separate worlds. The planets drifted across the night sky in patterns no one fully understood, while objects on Earth fell, rolled, and moved under rules that seemed unrelated. But Isaac Newton's mind saw unity where others saw division. Out of his relentless quest for order emerged one of humanity's greatest achievements, the laws of motion. These three laws would become the foundation of classical physics, forever transforming the way humankind understood the universe. They were not born in a single moment but from years of deep contemplation, precise experimentation, and a desire to reveal the hidden mathematical structure behind every movement in creation. The first law, often called the law of inertia, was radical for its time. It stated that an object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion remains in motion unless acted upon by an external force. This idea may seem simple now, but in Newton's day, it shattered centuries of belief rooted in Aristotle's philosophy, which claimed that objects naturally came to rest unless kept in motion by something. Newton proved the opposite, that motion is the natural state of matter, and only force causes change. With this, he established the first step toward understanding the seamless continuity between the heavens and the earth. A planet moving in space was no different from a ball rolling on the ground. Both obeyed the same cosmic principle. The second law took this understanding further. It described how force, mass, and acceleration are connected, that the acceleration of an object depends directly on the force applied and inversely on its mass. This simple yet profound relation, expressed as F-, allowed Newton to quantify motion itself. The universe was no longer governed by vague descriptions but by precise mathematics. Every push, pull, fall, and orbit could now be predicted and explained. This law gave scientists a universal language to describe how things move, whether it was a cannonball arcing through the air or the moon circling the Earth. Newton's equations became the heartbeat of physics, guiding discoveries for centuries to come. The third law, perhaps the most poetic of all, stated that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. It revealed a perfect balance woven into the fabric of existence. When a bird flaps its wings, the air pushes back. When a rocket launches into space, the exhaust propels it upward. This law extended beyond mechanics. It symbolized harmony in nature. Every interaction, no matter how small, was part of a grand exchange of energy and motion. Through this law, Newton described not only physical phenomena, but also a kind of universal symmetry, an eternal dance where nothing acts alone and every cause carries its counterpart. Newton's three laws of motion did more than explain movement. They unified the universe. Before him, people saw celestial and terrestrial mechanics as separate realms, each governed by its own set of rules. But Newton proved that the same principles that guided falling apples also governed the stars. The heavens were not divine mysteries beyond human comprehension. They were governed by the same natural laws that ruled everyday life. This revelation was revolutionary. It marked the birth of a mechanistic universe, one governed not by superstition or chance, but by elegant and predictable laws. The influence of these laws reached far beyond Newton's lifetime. They laid the foundation for engineering, astronomy, and technology. The ships that crossed oceans, the machines that powered the Industrial Revolution, and even the spacecraft that journeyed beyond Earth centuries later all owe their existence to Newton's insights. His laws became the invisible framework behind every structure built and every invention imagined. Even Albert Einstein, who later expanded our understanding of space and time, stood on Newton's shoulders, acknowledging his monumental contribution to human knowledge. Newton's brilliance was not merely in his ability to see patterns, but in his courage to challenge centuries of belief. He dared to declare that the universe was not ruled by chaos or divine whims, but by laws that could be discovered, tested, and proven. In doing so, he transformed science into a quest for universal truth. His laws of motion gave humanity a new way to see itself, not as separate from the cosmos, but as part of it. Every falling leaf, every orbiting moon, every spinning wheel became a reminder that we are all moving under the same set of principles that bind the entire universe together. In the grand story of science, Newton's laws of motion stand as pillars of understanding, connecting the tangible world we touch to the infinite expanse of space above. They are not just formulas on a page, they are the poetry of motion, the rhythm of the cosmos, and the testament to a single man's pursuit to reveal the order beneath creation. Through these laws, Isaac Newton didn't just describe how the universe works, he gave humanity the keys to explore it. Beneath the brilliance of his discoveries, behind the calm and disciplined face that history remembers, Isaac Newton was a man of profound solitude, mystery, and complexity. His personal life was marked not by joy or companionship, but by relentless work, sleepless nights, and an endless search for truth that went far beyond science. Newton lived much of his life alone, not by circumstance but by choice. His mind was consumed by thoughts so vast that few could understand them, and fewer still could reach the depth of his reasoning. To the world, he was a genius. To himself, he was a seeker, searching not only for the laws that governed motion and light, but for the hidden order behind existence itself. Newton's pursuit of knowledge often crossed the boundaries of science. While his public achievements reshaped physics and mathematics, his private writings revealed an obsession with alchemy, mysticism, and theology. For decades, he secretly studied ancient texts, coded manuscripts, and mystical symbols, seeking a deeper connection between God, nature, and the universe. He believed that the Creator had written the laws of the cosmos in a divine language, a sacred code that could be deciphered through both scientific reasoning and spiritual devotion. In his candle-lit study, surrounded by alchemical instruments and piles of notes, Newton searched for the philosopher's stone, not for wealth or immortality, but as a symbol of ultimate knowledge, the transformation of matter and spirit into perfection. Many historians would later find it astonishing that the same man who formulated the laws of motion also spent years decoding biblical prophecies. Newton wrote more on religion than on physics, diving deep into the scriptures to uncover hidden meanings. He rejected conventional interpretations of faith, believing that organized religion had distorted the true wisdom of God's creation. To him, understanding the universe was an act of worship, every discovery a revelation of divine design. He once wrote, "Gravity explains the motions of the planets, but it cannot explain who set the planets in motion." In those words lay the heart of Newton's belief that science and spirituality were not rivals but partners in revealing truth. His deep isolation and intensity often made him a difficult man. Newton had few close friends, and his temper could flare in moments of disagreement. His relationships with fellow scientists were sometimes strained by rivalry and mistrust. He guarded his discoveries with extreme secrecy, fearing that others would steal his ideas or misinterpret them before he was ready to share them with the world. This secrecy reflected both his perfectionism and his vulnerability. He demanded absolute certainty before presenting his work, knowing that a single error could tarnish his name. For years, he withheld his discoveries in optics and mathematics, revealing them only when urged by his peers. His debates with other scholars, especially with Robert Hooke and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, revealed a mind that was both brilliant and unyielding, guided by pride but fueled by an obsession for truth. Despite his fame, Newton's personal life was shadowed by emotional struggle. He never married, and letters from his youth suggest periods of melancholy and mental exhaustion. Yet within his solitude, he found the stillness needed for creation. The silence of his nights became the echo chamber of ideas that shaped the world. He often worked without rest, experimenting late into the night, scribbling equations by candlelight, surrounded by glass prisms, lenses, and handwritten manuscripts. His pursuit was not driven by fame or fortune, but by the hunger to understand, to uncover the architecture of reality itself. In later years, as his health declined and his fame grew, Newton served as master of the Royal Mint, reforming England's currency with the same precision he brought to science. Yet even in positions of power, his mind remained restless. He continued to write on theology and prophecy, convinced that knowledge was infinite and that humanity had only scratched the surface of divine truth. To him, every law of physics was a clue, every equation a glimpse into the mind of God. Newton's inner world remains one of the most fascinating contradictions in history. A scientist grounded in logic who was also a mystic drawn to the unseen. He lived between two realms, one of measurable laws and another of spiritual revelation. This dual nature made him both a pioneer of the Enlightenment and a man rooted in ancient wisdom. His life teaches that knowledge is not limited to what can be seen or measured, but also includes what can be felt, intuited, and imagined. When Newton died in 1727, the world honored him as the man who explained gravity and motion, but his private writings, discovered centuries later, revealed the full depth of his genius and his torment. He was not simply a mathematician or a physicist, but a philosopher of existence itself. He believed that every truth, whether found in the heavens or in sacred texts, pointed to the same source. In the end, Newton's personal journey was a mirror of his discoveries, a quest for order in the chaos, for unity between spirit and science, for light in the darkness. Through his struggles, solitude, and unwavering curiosity, Isaac Newton proved that the human mind, when guided by wonder, could touch the infinite. Isaac Newton's legacy is one of the most profound in human history. His discoveries did not merely advance science, they redefined what it meant to understand the universe. Before Newton, the cosmos seemed divided, heaven ruled by divine mystery and earth bound by imperfection. After Newton, everything became connected through elegant laws of nature, revealing that the same force guiding the planets also governed the fall of an apple. He transformed human thought, bridging the gap between the visible and the invisible, the earthly and the celestial. His work laid the foundation of classical physics, becoming the cornerstone upon which centuries of scientific progress would be built. Yet, Newton's legacy reaches beyond the formulas and equations. It lies in his way of thinking, his relentless curiosity, and his unyielding belief that the universe could be understood through reason and observation. Newton's Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, remains one of the greatest works ever written. Within its pages, he united the laws of motion and gravity into a single framework that could describe everything from the path of a cannonball to the orbit of planets. For the first time, the universe was not a mystery governed by divine intervention, but a system governed by universal laws. His work gave humanity the power to predict motion, calculate celestial paths, and measure forces with unmatched accuracy. Scientists, engineers, and explorers used Newton's equations to build machines, map the stars, and navigate oceans. It was as if Newton had handed humanity a key. The key to unlock the mechanics of creation itself. But Newton's impact extended far beyond science. His vision reshaped the philosophy of knowledge. He taught that truth was not to be accepted blindly, but discovered through observation, experimentation, and reason. His method, to question, test, and prove, became the foundation of the scientific revolution. The world moved from superstition to inquiry, from faith in authority to faith in evidence. Newton's approach inspired generations of thinkers who saw in his work not just answers, but the courage to ask new questions. He transformed science into a universal language, a bridge that connected minds across centuries and cultures. Even as time passed and new theories emerged, Newton's influence endured. When Albert Einstein introduced his theory of relativity, expanding the understanding of gravity and motion, he did not erase Newton, he honored him. Einstein famously said, "Newton, forgive me for standing on your shoulders." Those words captured the truth that every great discovery builds upon those who came before. Newton's universe was vast, orderly, and rational, a vision that continues to shape physics, astronomy, and even philosophy today. Without Newton's foundation, modern science would not exist as we know it. Yet, Newton's legacy is not just written in books or laboratories. It is reflected in the spirit of human curiosity itself. Every time a spacecraft launches into orbit, every time a satellite circles the Earth, every bridge, vehicle, and structure that obeys the laws of mechanics, all of it echoes his genius. His discoveries made it possible for humanity to reach beyond its limits, to explore the stars, to understand forces that govern both the smallest particles and the grandest galaxies. Newton's laws became the invisible framework of civilization's progress, woven into every field of modern technology. Beyond science, Newton's story teaches timeless lessons about perseverance and vision. He rose from obscurity, a lonely child from a rural village, to become the man who redefined the cosmos. He faced personal struggles, moments of isolation, and long years of quiet labor, yet his determination never faltered. Newton's life reminds us that genius is not born from comfort, but from curiosity, patience, and the courage to think differently. He looked at the world not as it was, but as it could be understood. In that pursuit, he gave humanity a new way to see itself, not as passive observers of nature, but as explorers of its secrets. As centuries have passed, Newton's light has not dimmed. His work continues to guide new generations of scientists and dreamers. In every field of physics, in every equation that describes motion or energy, Newton's influence endures like a quiet force of gravity, unseen yet omnipresent. His vision of an ordered universe still shapes how we search for truth. From the laws of gravity to the patterns of light, from the smallest atom to the vastness of galaxies, Newton's principles remain a constant thread tying all of creation together. In the grand narrative of human progress, Isaac Newton stands as a symbol of intellect and imagination, the man who turned wonder into knowledge and mystery into mathematics. His discoveries illuminated the path from darkness to understanding, proving that reason could unveil the secrets of the cosmos. Newton's legacy is not just the discovery of gravity or motion, it is the belief that no question is too great to be asked, no mystery too deep to be explored. He showed the world that knowledge is limitless, that truth lies waiting for those who dare to seek it. And even now, centuries after his death, every falling apple, every orbiting moon, and every beam of light carries the silent echo of the man who first unveiled the harmony of the universe. The genius who discovered gravity, and in doing so, revealed the power of the human mind.